Hello and welcome to Why Postliberalism Failed. My name is James Patterson. With me is my co-host and co-author Thomas Howes. I forget. I haven't spoken to you in a
How's
while. Towes.
yes.
Yeah,
How's it going? I like the
yeah.
question.
If we don't do these regularly, then I forget.
Yeah, it's all good.
Uh, I've been doing a lot of stuff at my new post here at the Institute of American Civics at the University of Tennessee. So I haven't been able to record. In the meantime, um, Thomas has been writing up a storm and recording other things and being generally very productive. But we're
Yeah,
back. We're
we're
back.
back. We're back. We're both very tired.
Yeah, I we started an hour late because I crashed face first down on my bed
Yeah.
after a pretty mad dash. Universities, once you start getting close to Thanksgiving, start to cram a lot of stuff into the weeks.
Hmm.
um I had to do some travel earlier, so I couldn't do a recording then, and we have kind of a backlog of stuff to do. I'm not sure, have we announced that the book is done? Like, did we in our last?
I don't know. I don't think so. Not on the show. I don't think so.
Yeah,
It's
we're
been a while.
done. We've been done. Now
Yeah.
it's all on the shoulders of Dan Hugger. Sorry if you guys could hear that. I accidentally kicked my trash can.
Dan Hugger at Acton University or Acton
Institute.
Institute.
Yeah.
And we've got a forward writer, Catherine Pakalik,
Mm-hmm.
Catholic University. She's a Spitfire, so she might, I don't know. We'll see. She might make our account look tame. We'll see.
She's got a lot of strong opinions, as do we, but it's good to have this thing in the can. And today we're going to be talking about something that's pretty important to the post-liberal project,
Mhm.
which is the academic work of Nazi jurist, was it crown jurist of the Nazi Party? Is that what it is?
Yeah,
Carl Schmitt.
Carl Schmidt. That's
So
right.
when I work on Carl Schmitt, most of the stuff that I look at is his early work. But Thomas is writing a kind of tripartite Carl Schmitt work, and one of them was at the Independent, right? And another was
Yep.
it Law and Liberty, or was it the
Law and
Dispatch?
Liberty. That's right.
And
And
then
now
the third one is going to be at where?
I'm not sure yet. I just pitched it to one editor, so I don't want to put pressure on them or people to know that I got rejected. So I'll
Oh,
keep that
right.
one in the yeah. But
It was First Things, right?
yeah, that's right. No, but the my first one was with Law and Liberty, and then I read the concept of the political. That's the one where everyone gets that whole friend enemy thing that is becomes like a slogan in the post-liberal and even NatCon and basically the new right in general likes to use that. Um, I read that and I responded to that. And then I read the other big one that everyone reads of Carl Schmidt, or actually no one reads of Carl Schmidt, but people like to cite things from it, is what's it with you? Sorry, political
Political theology.
theology. Political theology, which is I think of it as a book because it's three chapters, so I don't think of it as an essay. It's like a long essay or a short book. Um and yeah, so I critiqued that, and then I was like thinking about this. I'm like, huh, because it did not make Carl Schmidt very appealing to me after reading these
Yeah.
things in depth and reading some of the secondary literature on it. And so I at first I was like, well, I'm done with Carl Schmidt because like I'm not attracted to this at all, and I don't find it very compelling. But then I was like, but you know what it is actually really useful for is it gives like trying to understand what Carl Schmitt's up to, kind of gives like clarity for what like these people are up to, like what
Mm-hmm.
post-liberals are up to, even though it's not in their explicit doctrine normally, although sometimes for Vermeule he'll cite it, but in their implicit motivations.
Right.
That so I when I realized that I'm like, wow, now I got to write a third essay showing how that this how this shines light on the post-liberal movement. Because one of the things that people talk about the post-liberal movement is it's a moving target. It's like, first they're like integralist, and then they're not integralist.
Yeah.
First they support a bunch of immigration of Catholics, but now they don't support immigration. First they hated America, but now they're reinterpreting America's founding. So those are the is that where we're at with that reinterpreting America's founding?
Yeah, the idea from Adrian is that there's this classical legal theory that we abandoned, and when you look into what it constitutes, it's a bunch of weird, like Northern Italian stuff. Like, no, dude, that's wrong.
Yeah,
It's
it
it's
was bureaucrats of the old regime. That's what it
yeah,
was.
sure,
Yeah.
buddy. Um, this
Which,
is
James Madison was really into those like bureaucrats under Louis the 14th.
oh
Or
yeah. If you read the Federalist Papers, it's Raji and D'Estato for days.
yeah. But yeah, that's so the Schmidt actually helps you to kind of like make sense of what's going on there. Even under like sort of, underneath their like explicit argumentation. So that's where that's at. Sorry. Keep going. I'm exhausted, so I'm rambling.
Huh? You did. I wasn't saying anything. The thing about Schmidt is he is a figure that people perennially return to. Even when he was still alive,
Hmm.
he people would kind of rediscover him. And I have not read him as recently or written on him at all recently. But it's always been my impression that Carl Schmitt is the political philosopher you read if you don't understand political philosophy.
Hmm.
So if you want to argue a position, and it's difficult for you to establish what you are for, then you jettison the idea of being for anything
Hmm.
other than yourself or people who you see as advertised for yourself. And so, the idea of the friend enemy distinction is, very basic.
Hmm.
It's not, people act like it's smart that he's doing this. It's not smart, right? Like, it's
Hmm.
it's dumb. And what makes it
Yeah.
dumb is that it's the most primitive conception of politics. And so one of the ironies that you have with post liberals adopting this is they claim to want to advocate for the common good or the highest good, and those are not achievable in a regime has politics defined uh, on enmity.
Yeah.
The regime depends on friendship.
Yeah. That's right. Whose common good is this then? If you're dividing your polity between friends and enemies, and then, so implicit when the way it gets applied practically is to divide, like the left is our enemy, and then and so are the Reagan right, and so are the whatever libertarians. All those people maybe are like unuseful, but the left is our enemy. So you're either for us or against us, and politics then is about doing what benefits us and is against them. Then you don't really have a polity that you're seeking a common good for.
Exactly.
You're looking for the good of your friends.
By definition, not common.
Yeah, not common.
And that comes across in the arguments that are made by people like Adrian, who insists on um, identifying mostly people to loathe.
Yeah.
And in the fifth chapter of the manuscript, we talk about how the primary motivation behind a lot of post liberal argumentation is in common hatreds.
Yeah.
So the hatreds are common to the group that is internal. And so that reveals that the common good that they're describing refers only to the people within their own cohort.
Yeah.
And that's why Kevin Gallagher, who was once one of these left, like a left version of integralists, speak occasionally, and his version was always the common good is what we do to you.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's absolutely right. I mean, you note that it's not traditional Catholic social doctrine, or what it is. It's revolutionary doctrine of the sort of European conservatives who wanted to overtake these Republican governments and reestablish monarchy. I mean, that's where they're like connecting with. And it's not traditional. They've accepted this narrative that comes from those reactionaries about Catholicism that just is not historically accurate, you know? There wasn't the old regime from a standpoint of Catholicism, the old regime in France and stuff and whatever, that it was not this Catholic utopia. It was way closer to Gallicanism than anything like even good even the ideals of like an integralist model, which, obviously I'm not an integralist, but it wasn't, it was more Caesar than Christ. It was not what, you know, it should not be any ideal for any Catholic. And they ignore all these Catholic thinkers that were critical of it throughout the centuries or that did not have as rosy a picture of it. Right.
So Schmidt seems more um, revolutionary in America, I suspect,
Mm-hmm.
because generally speaking, the American conservative tradition does not have a reactionary component to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's always been a minor thread
Yeah.
to the conservative movement in the United States. It's partly by design, right? There used to be much stronger gatekeepers on the right, like William F. Buckley Jr. and Richard John
Mm-hmm.
Newhouse and the like. And what they could do is try to modify or reduce the temperature on a lot of these debates. And
Yeah.
so there's a kind of frisson, there's this kind of excitement that comes with discovering Schmidt. And what Schmidt is giving you permission to be is bad. He's like, he's essentially the right wing version of a lot of critical theory,
Yeah.
in which you can essentially suspend all of the serious logical work, all of the moral work that you have to do. You do
Yeah.
not have to be good. You just simply have to win.
Yeah.
And so the thing about Schmidt's work is that he's not new to this.
Mm-hmm.
There is a long sort of tradition of people who argue like this, and he's cagey in public about his contemporary Charles Marat,
Mm-hmm.
but he freely cites counter-revolutionary thinkers in his
Yeah.
work that engage in this same kind of unserious side taking and propaganda, and not propaganda, what's the word I'm looking for, what is it when you're writing a book that's meant to be more incendiary than serious?
Oh, like a diatribe
Yeah, it's more
or
of like a diatribe.
mm-hmm.
And so he rails against faults in Weimar
Yeah.
that exists, but his solution is the Hobbesian mortal god, right? And
Yeah.
we've seen this in the sort of restorationist or monarchist reactionary political thought from debased to
Mm-hmm.
Foucault to Marat. So this is not novel either. The only difference is that Schmidt is clever.
Mm-hmm.
His early work is more about Catholicism because he at least, feigns to be Catholic. And he writes the book Roman Catholicism and Political Form, and what he argues for is a Hobbesian sovereign that emulates the total control over the temporal regime that the Pope has over the spiritual. So he has this like radically ultramontanist conception of the papacy that he just mirrors um, onto the state. And the thing is that he gets both the theology wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and then also the irony of a Catholic political philosopher adopting Hobbes, whose
Mm-hmm.
major effort is to overthrow Bellarmine.
Yeah.
So like people forget that the second half of the Leviathan is just trying to tear the legs out from under Bellarmine.
Mm-hmm.
It's this bitter irony that Catholic reactionaries ultimately have to return to this kind of mysticism of the mortal God, or
Hmm.
in order to articulate their defense of a Catholic polity that they misunderstand and will never exist.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wonder how Deneen feel, because the thing is about the Deneen is Deneen has always never had any explicit interest in Carl Schmitt. He maybe at one point even rejected Carl Schmitt. Carl Schmitt's not a very popular guy with a lot of people because the Nazism and everything. It's kind of a turn off to most people. But one thing we noticed was that that the three people that Schmidt mentions as his forebears
This was
and
your
political.
catch.
Oh
Yeah, this
yeah,
was your catch. I
well,
loved this.
the three people that he mentions explicitly as his forebears in political theology, although he gives some little critique, but mostly sees himself in line with them, were Demest and Bonald and Donoso Cortez, which
Hey,
were
hey, wait a second. I recognize those three names.
yeah, where did we see those three names, James?
Um, well, as you found out, uh, from reading this, and I feel silly for not checking this, but you discovered that of course are the same three people that we talked about Deneen citing
Yes,
when
plus
speaking to
Louis below, but
uh
yes.
yeah that Deneen cited to um Bishop Robert Barron in his conversation. So this is a cute little clever way of smuggling Schmidt into a conversation. Rather
Yeah.
than talking about Schmidt, you talk about the people that Schmidt talks about.
Yeah, that's right. It
Yeah,
seems like that's maybe some influence of Mule on Deneen is that he got him to read these people that preceded Schmidt, Demest. I mean, we already know um that we already know that Vermeule started with Schmidt. He started with Schmidt back in his like
yeah.
neocon days when he was trying to defend
Torture.
torture and stuff like that, right? Back with Eric Posner and all that. But apparently he traced the sources. So sometimes, he'll talk about Demest now too. He'll talk about Donoso Cortez. And I've never seen Vermeulen mention Bonald, but we've seen Deneen mention Bonald with those other two. So clearly they're in that sort of tradition. And like you said, when yeah, it is strange though that he included among the people that he draws on though is Hobbes as well. You're right.
Yeah,
That he has that thing about authority and not truth makes the law, right?
yeah. That guess what?
Which
That's
which is from
wrong.
Hobbes. That was from
That's just
Hobbes, right?
wrong.
But Schmidt actually even radicalizes it even further than Hobbes does. Um, uh, but um, but that is strange. Yeah, you're right. Because Deneen, who's his chief target and why liberalism failed, who's the guy who
um,
started all this nonsense? He says it's
um,
Hobbes.
yeah,
Yeah, because Hobbes, he thinks that we get from
yeah.
Hobbes this sort of consent-based ethics. I mean, we've had our criticisms of Deneen on this too, um,
It's just
but
sophism. It's just not serious, which is why ultimately they like Schmidt, right? Because Schmidt doesn't
yeah,
require you to nail anything down.
yeah, yeah. No, that's right. And but yeah, no, and so it's strange though that Schmidt um connects this sort. What's the thing you say? Immortal God?
Yeah, the mortal god.
Yeah, he connects this mortal God thing to traditional Catholicism, and it's an odd claim to make, actually, because there's always two kingdoms and there's a bifurcation, there's a duality that Christianity creates between the two kingdoms.
And of course, Hobbes and his depiction of those two kingdoms grants the scepter and the crozier to the sovereign,
Yeah.
because he's defending the idea of a centralized authority that controls both the faith and the politics of a people. And Schmidt, like I said, tries to kind of split them up notionally in Roman
Yeah.
Catholicism and political form, but he doesn't. I mean, it's not a good book.
Yeah.
And the way that he does it is also by describing how the feature of this new politics should be that states embracing an autocratic approach that he attributes to the church also need to embrace the politics of the church's enemy, which
Hmm.
is the lodge. So it's a funny thing at the end of Roman Catholicism and Political Forum, he talks about the magic flute, right? This kind of Masonic sort of um, people don't know this about the magic flute, but there's a lot of Masonic imagery in it. And then in describing a rivalry between this Italian revolutionary who was a Freemason
Hmm.
and a Russian anarchist, he actually recommends that the church should side with the Italian Masonic revolutionary because his way of thinking about politics as a kind of subversive um, and internally shadowed approach is much better than the attempt to publicly reason into absolute radical freedom. Um, and if that sounds kind of dumb or weird, you would be correct. It is a
Yeah.
dumb and weird thing to say because Schmidt is dumb and weird. And we may get into the weirdness of Schmidt when it comes to his the diaries that he had published and a little bit here, but we should cover some other things here, like uh, notions of like Führer principle.
Oh yeah.
What's
So,
that?
well, Führer principle, yeah, it's the the German version of the that principle of Roman law that the princeps is absolved from the law, and also that principle of Roman law that the princeps is whatever pleases the princeps has the force of law. Like those are the two most autocratic principles of the Roman law as we've inherited it. Now, that wasn't the old Republican Roman law, of course not, because they didn't believe in that autocracy except for emergency dictator. Um, but that comes from Caesar Augustus and his changing of the Roman Constitution. And when the people in the midi so the German version of that is the Führer principle, the leader principle, right? That the dictatorship of, for instance, the Führer, that Hitler. Um, Now, before that all happened, the Nazis came to power. I mean, not Vermeulen, sorry, his forebear, Schmidt was um promoted like in print that thing you mentioned, and also in political theology. Some people cite political theology as, a place for talk about emergency powers, but its emergency powers are just like an example so that he can get to what he really wants is a personal sovereign. And a personal sovereign who can decide when the exception is, so he has to so that he can make an exception, right? So it's not about an occasional use of an emergency power. It's about opening the door to autocratic power because he wants a personal sovereign, not somebody who's not a liberal democratic leader. Um, so that's why when it came to this guy named Franz von Papen, he got Hindenburg to agree to allow him to stage this coup of the state government of Prussia, right? Because it was like the state level government within their, whatever. And because that, what I don't remember what we called them, the Bundes or whatever, but it was like
Yeah.
the state, right? Um, it was run by like a left wing party, right? So Franz von Papen goes in there, stages a coup, and then takes control of it for the central government, right? So this weakened the separation of powers in Germany. It leveled the separation of powers because Prussia was like the biggest Bund or whatever you call their states or whatever. It was like their biggest one. It'd be like taking over. It would be like a coup of like California or something like that, or
Right.
right? Even bigger than that. Um, but not Vermeulen. I keep calling Vermeulen. Schmidt. He goes in there and he defends the move with his very broad understanding that was unorthodox understanding of this provision in the Weimar Constitution for emergency powers to defend the move, right? So this is the first example of like what he means by this emergency power, right? And then that weakens the checks and balances and separations of powers of the Weimar Republic like a year before the Nazis take over.
I'm sorry if this noise is picking up a camera while I'm like messing around, but I'm looking around for something while you're talking. So apologies to anyone watching this on YouTube if it looks weird.
Oh no, it's okay. But then Hitler in comes to power, and then shortly thereafter, they have the Night of the Long Knives, where Hitler has a bunch of his political enemies murdered in the SA. And uh, at that point, Hitler was a god to Schmidt,
Yeah.
because he wrote like for like a month or two later, he writes this article called "The Führer Protects the Law," right? And he says that because he's this sovereign now, he's got this Führer print. He applies the Führer principles, right? That he's the sovereign who like stands above the law, and we owe him our allegiance because he protects us, right? So like that's his model of like sovereignty. And in the foreword to my copy of Political Theology, one of the commentator, the guy named Tracy Strong, who I falsely thought was I screwed up with his pronoun when I had to correct it in my essay. But he says like that it was his own philosophy of like personal sovereignty which led Schmidt to endorse Hitler. Now that was a temporary thing. Eventually, he grew cold. He got chilled on Hitler after a couple of years. But at that time, he supported Hitler because he was the personal sovereign that he was looking for, right? And he supported the Führer principle, which is, basically the dictatorship of Hitler, that he could do whatever he wanted. Whatever pleases the Führer has the force of law.
This is not a serious way of thinking about sovereignty,
Yeah.
because what it does is it surrenders the responsibility of the people to think about themselves or the good.
Yeah.
It eschews any concept of there being any kind of reasoning out of what that good might be,
Hmm.
deliberation over what it might be. It eschews the ideas, therefore, of prudence
Yeah.
and of moderation, and instead it defends things only in terms of loyalty.
Hmm.
And loyalty is not a virtue, right?
Yeah.
The extent to which loyalty is a good thing is entirely dependent on to what you are loyal.
Hmm.
And the issue with this kind of loyalty is it's a loyalty to someone who is very wicked. But what Schmidt wants is an end to political disorder. Is often the response, right? Like you can't have freedom without order. But Schmidt doesn't want freedom.
Hmm.
He wants there to be a solution in a person,
Yeah.
right, and not in a constitution. And the reason he wants the person rather than the constitution is that he's frankly not capable of imagining a political order um, that can be constituted well, because he's himself not capable of constituting himself well. He is a person of great disorder in his personal life.
Yeah.
Um, the name of the Italian anarchist I just want to mention is Mazzini. This is at the end of his at the end Schmidt at the end of Roman Catholicism and Political Form talks about Bakunin and Mazzini. So I couldn't remember their names. That's so I was
Hmm.
throwing around stuff in my office. Um,
Do you
uh,
recommend that work?
it's
Catholicism?
it's not good, but it is useful for seeing where he started,
Hmm.
because it was written in the 20s. We've talked about it on here before. And he ends by talking about Russia, which is important because Russia
Hmm.
plays a kind of important role in post liberalism. It's treated as a kind of post liberal Christian alternative to the decadent West. And of course, it is not really post liberal because it was never liberal. And it is very not Christian.
Hmm.
The religious religiosity in Russia is basically zero.
Hmm.
But his account of Russia at the end here is it's funny how like it bears a resemblance in some ways to what he's describing, what we're seeing now. But yeah, he says that he does ultimately recommend that the Catholic Church adopt a concept of humanity as well as a kind of politics of secrecy that he observes in the Lodge. So the reason why I keep bringing up the Lodge is that Schmidt is also an inheritor of the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy theory, and
Hmm.
that's one of the justifications for being loyal to the friend you find in Hitler, because he's you can't
Opposed to those
actually.
enemies.
What's that?
Because
Yeah,
he's
because these
opposed
are
to
your
those
enemies.
enemies.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. These are your enemies, and they don't play fair, right? The whole
Hmm.
idea of constituting a political order seems naive, right? It's like, how could you possibly imagine anyone playing fair when you have the lodge subverting all of the political institutions? And it's like, where on earth did you get this idea? And
Hmm.
the answer is that he's kind of brain broken. A lot of reactionaries in the 19th century simply cannot conceive of Republican virtue. They do not know what it is. They do not possess it themselves. And whenever
Hmm.
people demonstrate it, they condemn it.
Hmm. No, that's really yeah, definitely it seems like there's there's some sort of false community or like distorted community and meaning that people get from rallying behind a strong man against an enemy.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a good sense of community in your life just within free civil society, there could be the temptation then to get that sort of sense of community. And also the sovereign kind of fills some gap for people whose faith is struggling because they're it's like you said, they choose Barabbas, right? They want the concrete physical uh God that they feel they is right there and they can see him and they can start seeing him acting providentially. So that it's to make up for the fact that they don't have a strong sense of God, the real God acting providentially in their life and having control,
Yeah,
right?
the two sort of opening passages
Hmm.
of the book feature who the people choose during the passion instead of Christ.
Hmm.
One is, we have no king but Caesar, and give us Barabbas.
Yeah.
And so it makes you think of Augustine describing all illegitimate regimes as a band of robbers, and of course Barabbas was a robber.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
and so the thing about Hitler, of course, is that he began as a robber. He was robbing Jews. He's
Yeah.
stealing from them, right? Like,
Hmm.
and so it makes sense that that Schmidt would like this sort of thing. It's the thing about we talked about this with Victoria Holmes. That interview has like stuck with me. I've
Hmm.
never come away from an interview so shook. But the kind of people that post liberals recruit are people that, as you say, sort of are in this like shaken faith, and so their
Yeah.
faith is connected to a person,
Hmm.
not a person who brings them into like a sort of sanctified life, but
Hmm.
instead to like being based. And that's like,
Hmm.
and the word based is an abbreviation of debased. And it's a very sort of intentionally wicked, but also the way in which
Oh, I
it's
didn't know that.
yeah, the idea of being debased is also linked to a sense of like powerlessness or ineffectiveness.
Hmm.
You're unable to control yourself or anything around you. And when you read post-liberal work, often in the way that it constructs its arguments is to explain how it is that liberalism has done all of these things to you,
Hmm.
right? And so the reason why you are doing the common good to everyone else is that you're finally powerful enough with the right, with the right leader to start doing it back to everyone else. Except yours is good because it's Catholic, or but it's not, right? It's like
Hmm.
fake. It's like a fake. It's like a simulacrum of Catholicism. So there's this desire in Schmidt and people who read Schmidt to stress the weakness of the people, right? And that is Republican vice, of people who are
Hmm.
incapable of being virtuous enough to govern themselves. So you have to almost persuade people that they're weak, and the only thing they have to offer is their loyalty.
Hmm. Hmm.
So let's see. We've done friend and enemy distinction as the concept of the political. We've done Führer Prinzip, um, and we've
Personal
done
sovereignty and all
yeah,
that.
and we've
Yeah.
done. So what is? Did we do political theology directly, like what it is?
Well,
And
well, that he starts with the famous line is sovereign is he who makes the exception. And it's sort of covered under the concern of defending that the leader of the community should be able to have discretion not only in times of emergency, but from when determining when an emergency is. And, you know, there's debate for that, whether there's this like extreme emergency discretion of an executive, so Lincoln kind of had to exercise some of that during the Civil War. That's not particularly that interesting. What's more interesting is why the reason Schmidt is superfluous when it comes to emergency power stuff. Really, like you could talk about all this stuff without ever mentioning Schmidt. The reason that people really like Schmidt, though, is the reason he gets into this emergency power and defends it is because he's really defending personal sovereignty. He doesn't like a rule of law, even though Vermeule likes
Yeah,
to
personal
pretend.
sovereignty doesn't mean individuals being autonomous. It means that sovereignty adheres in a single person.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because whereas we in a constitutional democracy, we see it as a rule of law. That law that is sovereign. And it gets its legitimacy from the consent of the governed, of course, but it's the law that's sovereign in our constitutional order. Um, in a pre-modern, pre-constitutionalist like modern state, the sovereign was often seen more as the person, the king or something, right? Who is the sovereign. And we the people, the body politic, hand over political authority to that sovereign, right? Sure, there can be a consent element, unless you go the divine right of kings thing, which, was propaganda. Um, but still, um, there's this idea of a sovereign, a personal sovereign. And for Schmidt, if you dig into his rationale for that, you find out this work isn't really about exceptions, it's really about sovereignty, and it's really about personal sovereignty as opposed to a rule of law. He's very critical of the liberal democratic idea of a rule of law. And he's more honest about this. Like Vermeule tries to pretend that what he prefers is a rule of law, but what Vermeule really prefers is a sovereign exercising rule by law. That's a very different thing than a
It's a
rule of
very
law.
important distinction, not
Yeah.
rule of law, but rule by law, which is nothing more than the working out of the sovereign will.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Um, so he wants to defend this, and his reason is you wonder, like, well, why should we believe in a personal sovereign? Well, he tries to make it an argument by association, like that there was a theology. The reason we got rid of personal sovereigns was because we got a decrepit theology. So he thought that it was liberal democracy was a fruit of deism, right? And if we went back to a theistic worldview, we would want our politics to map over with our theology, so that just as there's a transcendent principle guiding the spiritual order, there like in the church, which or in it through his vicar, the Pope, right? Okay, the fair enough. There's a transcendent head of the temporal order as well. Somebody who's not part of the political community but in its laws but transcends it. And like you said, it's really a mortal God thing, right?
Yeah.
And
Like, what are you talking about? Like,
yeah,
it's
and he
why
thinks that
why
that's
do they have to be parallel? Like,
yeah.
what he doesn't make this
No, he doesn't actually argue that, and he doesn't even look through the whole history of like this issue. Really, it all assumes a very sort of um it was that bunch of truisms that you find among reactionary thinkers in the 19th century that are anti-enlightenment,
Yeah.
romanticizing the old regime, right? Not realizing that, like, if you think about it, really the two biggest defenders of the sovereign, the personal sovereign, are like Bodin and Hobbes, right? Not exactly like, church fathers,
Yeah,
right?
not church fathers. Bowden couldn't decide whether he wanted to be Catholic or Protestant. He kept going back and forth,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like
And
France
for
did at the time.
And
Its kings, at least.
At least with Bowden, his more bigger concern was just like peace. He was just trying to find some way to we could not have civil war all the time, right?
Yeah,
Same thing with Hobbes, I guess. He's just focused on civil war. Um, but uh, but yeah, no. But the idea that deism creates this dualism is like no, the desacralization of the temporal does not happen because of deism. It happened, or or atheism. It happens because of Christianity.
Yeah.
Christianity desacralizes the temporal. Now Caesar Augustus is not our God, right? You know what I mean? Because in no, because obviously before Caesar Augustus, that was actually, in fairness, before Caesar Augustus, the Romans also did not deify any of their leaders or whatever. Um, uh, but
Just on that point of desacralization by Christianity, William McCormick,
mhm,
I'm not sure if he has been um, made a priest in the Jesuit order, but he is he's what do they call them in the Jesuits
oh,
before
like
you become a priest?
can't remember.
Yeah, it's a specific title. Anyway, he is information in the Jesuit order. He wrote a book called The Christian Structure of Politics on De Reino of Thomas Aquinas. And that's
Hmm.
his reading of Aquinas and De Reino, is this attempt to kind of um, reduce the idea of the king as a kind of sacral order.
Yeah,
And the reason that the church does this, of course, is that when you elevate as Christ the King, you are also diminishing temporal orders as merely instruments for serving the common good.
that's right. That's right. And that was most of the dialectic between the church and the state throughout all the centuries, right? Was, hey, your authority is pretty limited.
Yeah.
Right? You're here and we're dealing with stuff up here or whatever. So you need to get in line with us rather than the other way around, right?
And the
Uh,
19th century is this peculiar moment
mhm.
when the church is essentially over a barrel as a result of the Reformation and its own sort of decline vis-a-vis temporal authority. And
Yeah.
so it's sort of grasping onto whichever states it can use in order to protect it.
Yeah,
First,
that's
its
right.
possessions in the Papal States, and then to protect it from full like annihilation, as they fear after the reunification of Italy. And it makes for a lot of bad work, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of panic,
Yep.
and there's a lot of axe grinding from the French Revolution that goes on.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
Schmidt is just caught up in all that.
Yeah.
And the only reason people like him is that he gives a kind of philosophical gloss to just doing what you want without regard for doing the right thing. I mean, it's just,
Hmm.
it's just Thrasymachus, but with a German accent.
No, that's good. I like that. There's Thrasymachus with a German accent. That's good. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I think that's right. And but if you actually fast forward, if you rewind, before the French Revolution, I mean, think about this. Like when when the Pope sent a delegate to George Washington and they said, "Hey, we're gonna name these bishops. Is that okay?" George Washington's like, "Yeah, I don't care.
yeah, it's none of
What?
my business.
None of my business." They were like, "Whoa." Because every one of those like French kings or whatever had like veto power on bishops because there was everything had to be like subordinated to their rule, right? It was it
Are you
just
telling
wasn't.
me, Thomas? Are you telling me that this John Locke founded, Constitution with its Freemason first president gave us
Yeah.
Libertas Ecclesia and
Yep, that's right.
His Most Christian Majesty, the King of
Yep.
France, posed a serious threat to the autonomy of the church,
Yep, that's right.
despite being a declared Catholic.
That's right. They built better than they knew, right?
Oh
And
no!
and actually, I actually, part of me doesn't like that. You know, who said that they built better than they knew? Wasn't it when the Bishop of New
So yeah,
York?
that's originally from the Third Plenary Council of the American Clergy, and the person who restored that to memory was Peter Lawler.
Hmm.
And it's we quote built better than they knew, but it's actually a different verb. I just forgotten what it is. Michael Breinbach and I sort of discovered this in a parallel inquiry into the Third Plenary Council. I can probably dig it up here because I actually have the papers, the memorial of the Third
Hmm.
Plenary Council in my Dropbox here. But yeah, I've never fully signed on to that idea. Um, the idea of like, and practically speaking, the American regime functions as a kind of uh, Thomistic mixed regime, or what
Hmm.
have you.
Yeah.
You know, that's a conclusion you can only reach by standing at quite a distance from the operation of politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah, no,
I
I
appreciate the
also,
sentiment.
well, also like I feel like they knew quite a bit. Like the founding part, they were pretty good with this political theory stuff, I thought. So they knew quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm looking up the third plenary council, but I don't know if I'm going to find it.
It's amazing how much that founding generation, how well they understood political theory matters, even as a populace. It was just amazing.
Yeah. Well, I'll find it later. Anytime I can shout out Michael Breidenbach's work too.
Oh yeah.
Our Dear Bought Liberty, a fantastic book he wrote on Harvard University Press about Calverts and the Carols.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's right. Hey, so maybe we should wrap up this one and do our second recording. But
That's
that's why
right. We're
we're going to be
doubling up
wearing the
today.
same we're going to be doing the same wearing the same clothing for our next episode, everyone.
Yeah. So Carl Schmidt sucks.
But he does help us understand the post-liberals a little better. That's why
Yeah.
their positions are always changing. The thing that's constant is they want some personal sovereign to follow, to defeat their enemies, and that's basically it. I mean, that's
Hence why
the
the only fixed idea for them is JD Vance.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. Before that, it was Trump, but now they got a better one with JD Vance because then
Yeah.
they can fly a yellow papal flag next to it. So
Yeah. Before that, it was just poor lapsed Melania.
yeah,
Wife number three.
yeah. That's
All
right.
right.
That's why
Thank
they
you,
were hoping for
everybody.
Baron Trump to be the.
Oh, that's right. First of his name,
Yeah.
Baron Trump, King Baron Trump. Uh, Nonsense. All right, everybody.